Welcome to this Wise Owl Excel VBA tutorial. In this part of our series on writing SQL for Excel files, we're going to look at grouping rows in your result sets. So we'll start with a quick reminder of the aggregation functions that we can use before we look at how to group a result set based on column values. We'll look at how you can then sort that result set based on the aggregated values, and then continue with the grouping theme by looking at how to group by multiple columns, group by calculated values, and then finish the video grouping by date parts. So let's get started. If you've been following along with previous parts of this playlist, you'll be fairly familiar with the basic setup by now, so you may prefer just to skip to the next chapter of this video. If you haven't seen previous parts of the series, here's a quick idea of the basic setup. We have a macro-enabled workbook called Grouping Rows, and in there we can click this Run Query button to extract data from a separate Excel file called Movies. The Movies workbook contains just a single worksheet in this video called Film, and there are 1200 films in this list. I'm going to keep the Movies workbook open for the duration of this video just to point out various things as we work through the video, but feel free to close the Movies workbook, all the code will still work. I have both these files stored in the same folder, and I'll drop a link in the video description so that you can download these files and follow along with writing the code with me if you'd like to. The code in the Grouping Rows workbook relies heavily on Microsoft ActiveX data objects. Now, I'm not going to talk about that much in this video. The focus of this series is on the SQL side of things. So if you are interested in the ActiveX data object side and how to create connections to extra Excel workbooks, then we have a separate playlist which covers that. And I'd recommend starting with this video here, How do I get data from a closed Excel file using VBA? Just to show the basic code that's triggered when we click the Run Query button on the menu sheet. In the Visual Basic Editor, we've got a basic subroutine which constructs a simple SQL query. So really the only job of this subroutine is to construct the string, which is then passed into a separate subroutine which deals with all the complicated stuff. So this subroutine establishes the connection to the Movies workbook, and then it creates a record set, and it uses the query we've created here to set the source property of the record set object. The rest of the code deals with writing that information out into a new worksheet and doing some basic formatting as well. So just to show the final results, if we head back to the menu sheet and we run this query by clicking the appropriate button, we'll see a list of all of the genres and runtimes for each individual film in the film sheet of the Movies workbook. For the first example then, I'd like to show the total runtime for each different genre in this list. To start with, let's apply the sum function to the runtime column to calculate the total runtime. Let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and then just before the runtime field, let's enter the sum function, so sum, open some round brackets, close the round brackets after referencing the runtime field, and then let's assign an alias. So we can say as total runtime, and I'll try and spell that correctly. Now this is going to cause a problem, as you'll know if you've watched the previous video in the series on aggregation functions. If we head back to the menu sheet and we attempt to run this query now, we're going to return an error message. And the error message description tells us that the query does not include the specified expression genre as part of an aggregate function. So essentially that's telling us that because we've aggregated one column in our select statement, it wants us to aggregate everything else, including the genre field. Now that's not quite what we want to do in this case. We don't want to sum or average or min, max or count the genre. We want to put each genre into a separate group. So all the adventure films will form one single row in this output and find the total runtime for all the adventure films. And in order to do that, we need to include the group by clause in our query. Let's just have a quick look at where the group by clause needs to fit in with our current select statement. So we've created lots of select statements in this playlist so far, but never one including a group by clause. So you can see here that group by sits just below the where clause if your query has one. Ours doesn't yet. We will include a where clause and an order by clause later on in the video, but for now we'll just make sure that our group by clause sits below the from clause of the select statement. And the idea for the group by clause is that we list any non-aggregated columns from the select list in that section. So to make that work, let's modify our existing query. If we head back to the Visual Basic Editor, we can add a continuation character to the end of the from clause. And then on the next line, we can create a group by clause, another continuation character, and then we simply need to include any column from the select list which we haven't aggregated. So in fact, I've copied and pasted the entire thing. Let's just do it like this. And having done that, if we now head back to the menu sheet and click our Run Query button again, we now succeed in running the query and get the total runtime for all of the films in each individual genre in the list. Now that we've grouped this data, we can include as many extra aggregate columns as we like. We've covered these aggregation functions in quite a lot of detail in the previous video in the playlist, so let's just have a very quick recap of some of the basic functions. I'd like to include a count of the number of films in each genre, an average runtime, and a min and a max runtime as well. So heading back to the Visual Basic Editor, I'm going to include the count in between the genre and the sum of runtimes. So I'm going to include a new column here, beginning with a comma, and then use the count function. Now, as we saw in the previous video, you can count the values in a column, or you can count the number of rows in the result set. I'm going to count the number of rows by inserting an asterisk character, close around brackets, and then provide an alias for this as number of films or number of rows, something like that. I can then concatenate the continuation character. Then for the next few examples, these are all going to be based on the runtime column. So I'm going to copy and paste the sum of runtime, and I'm going to paste that in 3 times. So we have 4 copies of the sum function. Then I'm going to change the first sum function to say Avg, and then change the alias to say average. And then the next sum function will be the min, and this will be the minimum runtime. And then finally the max function as well. I'm going to change the alias to say maximum runtime. One last quick little thing, I'd like to format or round the averages to have a maximum of 2 decimal places. So if I were to head back to the menu sheet and run this query at this point, some of our films or some of our genres have quite a large number of decimal places in the results. So I'd like to reduce this to a maximum of 2 decimal places, and I can do that by wrapping the round function around the average function. So I can say round, open some round brackets, avg f.runtime, follow that with a comma, and then say 2 for the maximum number of decimal places. Having done that, I can head back to the menu sheet one more time and run the query, and now we get a slightly neater set of results. We can use the results of these aggregation functions to sort the results of our query. So let's say we wanted to sort this list so that the genres with the most films in them appear at the top of the list. So we'll go in descending order of number of films. We need to add in our order by clause in the appropriate place, and the order by clause always sits at the end of the select list. So to include an order by clause, let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and we'll include an extra continuation character at the end of the group by clause, and then on the next line we'll begin an order by clause. We'll add another continuation character, and then we can simply copy and paste the expression that calculated the count of rows or the number of films. So I'm going to copy the count function and then paste that in. And I want to sort that in descending order, so I'll add the DESC modifier there. Okay, so having done that, we can head back to the menu sheet and we can run that query again, and we'll find the films with the most genres, the genres with the most films sitting at the top of the list. Now there are some genres which have the same number of films, so let's say here we wanted to sort those in, what should we say, ascending order of average runtime. We could pick any of the other aggregate fields that we like. Let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and to include an extra column in the order by clause, we can use the same technique we've seen in the select list. So we can add a continuation character, and then on the next line we could copy and paste the average runtime. I'm not going to bother with the rounded version of this, so let's just copy the expression, and then I'm going to remove the round function so that it's just the average runtime, and we'll go in ascending order for that. So we can close the double quotes. Okay, so having done that, we can head back to the menu sheet and run the query again, and we'll get the results returned in descending order of number of films and then in ascending order of average runtime. We could also include a where clause to filter out rows before the aggregations are applied. So for example, let's say we only wanted to create this list of aggregations for films which have won at least 1 Oscar. I'm just going to do a little bit of tidying up first actually. Let's head back to the menu sheet and delete all of the sheets except for the menu sheet by clicking this handy button. And then back in the Visual Basic Editor, I'm going to get rid of the 2 columns for the minimum and maximum runtimes. I'm then going to replace those with a sum function, but this one's going to calculate the sum of Oscar wins for each genre. So I can copy and paste the sum of runtime and then change the column reference to say Oscar wins. And of course I'll change the alias as well to say total Oscar wins. Okay, so having done that, we can head back to the menu sheet and run the query, and we'll see the column has appeared or replaced the min and max runtimes with the total Oscar wins. Now at the moment our list is being sorted by descending order of number of films, and the action genre is the most heavily populated one in the list of films. If we include a where clause to filter out rows for films which did not win any Oscars, then this order might well change. Let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor and add in our where clause. So we need to be careful about where we place this, of course. So it's select from where, group by, order by. So making sure we include our where clause in the appropriate place, let's include a simple criteria. Criteria in the where clause apply to individual rows before the aggregations are applied. So we're going to say where the f.Oscar wins column is greater than 0. We can then concatenate another continuation character to complete this select statement. And then if we head back to the menu sheet and run that query again, you'll see quite a difference certainly in the position of the action genre. It's fallen all the way down here to the 14th most heavily populated genre, with only 6 Oscar-winning films in that category. You may also notice that we have a reduction in the number of genres we've returned. If I switch back to sheet 7 here, then we've lost any genres which had no Oscar-winning films in them. So that's in mystery, family, and of course the awful genre. So adding a where clause to filter rows before aggregations are applied can have quite a dramatic impact in your query results. Let's move on and look at how to group by multiple columns in the same query. I'm just going to start by tidying up a little bit first by removing the order by clause and also the entire where clause as well. This will give us a little more data to work with without filtering out too many rows. So as well as grouping by the genre, I'd also like to group by the certificate for each film. To do this, all we really need to do is include the certificate column in the group by clause. We don't technically need to display it in the select list, although the results will look a little strange if we don't choose to include that column. So let's just copy the genre column and then paste it in on the next line. And I'm going to type in a comma at the beginning of that line and then change the field name from genre to certificate. Now, of course, I've included an extra column in the select list here, which is not aggregated. So it's not an account, sum, average, function, etc. So if I did try to run this query again by going back to the menu sheet, I'm going to encounter the same error that I saw earlier on. So this time it's complaining about not being able to aggregate the certificate field. Okay, so in order to make this query valid, if we're not going to aggregate the certificate field, we must include it in the group by clause. And all we need to do is exactly what we've done here in the select list. I can copy and paste the definition of the certificate field into the group by clause and just make sure that I've included that extra continuation character on the previous line. So having done that, if I head back to the menu sheet again and run that query, I now get each genre broken down into the various different certificates that have been awarded to films in that category. It's worth noting that the order of the columns in the select list doesn't have to match the order of the columns in the group by clause. Let's just demonstrate that by switching the genre and certificate order in the group by clause. So we'll head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and I'm just going to cut the certificate field name from that line, the last line of the group by clause, paste it just before genre in the previous line, and then cut genre and place that on the line just below. So the same fields are listed, just in a different order. And if we head back to the menu sheet and run the query, you can see the immediate impact of that. So it has an influence on the sort order of the query without including an order by clause. Because we've grouped by certificate first, it's ordered the results by the certificate column, followed by ordering by the genre column. Whereas in the previous example, it's sorted by genre first and then by certificate. I think that looks a little odd personally. I prefer to have my select list and group by list in the same order, so we could happily reverse those changes, or we could do the same thing for the select list. We could place certificate first in exactly the same way we've just done for the group by clause. Switch those two fields around and then head back to the menu sheet and run the query again, and there we go. So that looks a little neater to my eye at least. So far, all of our grouping has been applied to existing columns in our data source, but you can also create expressions and group on the results of those instead. Let's just change our query back. I want to go back to grouping on just the genre field to begin with, and then we'll group by a separate column that determines whether a film is a winner or a loser based on the value of the Oscar wins column. So to do that, let's head back to the VB editor, and then we're going to get rid of the certificate field entirely. So we'll get rid of that from both the select list, and as genre now is the first column in the select list, I need to make sure it begins not with a comma. And in the same way, we need to do the same thing in the group by clause. Let's get rid of certificate and then make sure that we don't have a comma at the beginning of the first column in there. Okay, now what we're going to do in the select list after the genre field, we're going to add a new field using an if function to check whether the film is a winner or a loser. So I'm going to type in a comma and then open an if function with IIF and then open some round brackets. I'm then just going to copy and paste the reference to the Oscar wins column and paste that in just after the open round bracket and check if that is equal to 0. Follow that with a comma, and if that's true, I want to produce the phrase or the word loser, and that's got to be enclosed in some single quotes as it's a string. Follow that with another comma and then enter the word winner in another set of single quotes before closing the round brackets. And then let's assign an alias. Let's call this one as awards. Okay, I need to include an extra continuation character at the end. And once again, if I want to make sure that this query is valid, this is a column which is not included in an aggregate function in a select list where there are existing aggregate functions. So once again, if I tried to run this query, I'm going to get the same sort of error message that I saw. My query does not contain the specified expression as part of an aggregate function. That's not what I want to do, of course. I want that expression to be included in the group by clause instead. So heading back to the Visual Basic Editor, I can just copy and paste. I'm going to copy and paste virtually the entire line here, everything except for the continuation characters at the end. Paste that in after my existing genre column group. Make sure that I include a continuation character on the previous line, and then get rid of the alias for the column at the end there. Okay, so the same expression as we used to generate the values is now used in the group by clause as well. So if we head back to the menu sheet and run the query again, we can see that for each genre we get a loser and a winner row, at least for all the genres which have both winners and losers. As you can see, some genres, such as the awful genre, don't have any winners in them at all, so we only get the loser group. We can happily group on multiple calculated values in the same way we grouped on multiple existing values. So let's add another calculation which works out whether a film is short, medium or long, based on its runtime in minutes. So we can head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and in the select list first, let's create the calculation that will generate those three values. Because I've got three possibilities this time, rather than writing a nested if function, I'm going to use the switch function instead. So I'm going to say switch and then refer to the f.runtime field and then check if that is less than 100, followed by a comma, and if that's true, I'll describe the film as short. I can then type in a comma after that, and then I'm just going to copy and paste those first two arguments, and then check if the value of the runtime is less than 200, and if so, change the description to the word medium. Following that, I could explicitly test if the runtime is greater than or equal to 200, but as that must be the case anyway if I reach this stage here, I can simply shortcut that to the value true. So the logical test, runtime greater than or equal to 200, will return true if we reach this stage of our switch function. So we can just write the value true in there, followed by a comma, and then produce the description for that, which I'm going to call long. I can then close the round brackets and provide an alias as film length. Again, we've covered both the if and switch functions in previous videos, so if you're interested in how those work, then I'd recommend looking up those videos earlier in this playlist. So I've created a new column in my select list which isn't in an aggregate function. So to conform to the rules, I need to make sure that that expression also sits within the group by clause. So for this one, I'm just going to copy all of this up to the end of the closed round brackets at the end of the switch function. At the end of my group by clause, concatenate a continuation character and then paste in what I've just copied and close that extra set of double quotes at the end of that line. Okay, so having done that, we can head back to the menu sheet, run that query again, and we've got yet another grouping category to break our films down into even more separate groups. Grouping on the results of calculations is especially useful when you want to group based on parts of dates. So let's say, for example, we want to find this set of aggregations for films released in different years. So we'll get rid of our existing grouping of genre, awards and film length. Let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and we can remove all of those first three lines from the select list, and then also from the group by clause. We're going to replace those with the calculation, which gives us the year of the film's release date. So for the first line in our select list, we'll open some double quotes and go for the year function to find the year of the film's release date. I'll give that an alias as well, so I'll say as release year, and then close the double quotes and concatenate a continuation character. And then I'm just going to copy the year function and place that in my group by clause before closing the double quotes there again. Okay, so having done that, let's head back to the menu sheet. I'm going to do a bit of tidying up here as well. Let's get rid of all the other worksheets, then run the query, and we'll see a list of all of the years for film release dates sorted in ascending order all the way down to the year 2016, which is when my database of films finishes. I think I'd prefer to see this list sorted in descending order of release year, so that the most recent year sits at the top of the list. We've seen previously in the video that you can happily order by the results of an aggregation function, but you can also order by the results of any other expressions placed in the group by clause. So back in the Visual Basic Editor, because the year function is included in the group by clause, I can also order by that expression. So I'm just going to copy and paste that combination of two lines there, and then include a continuation character at the end of that previous line, and then paste that in. I can then just change the word group to the word order, and I want to order by the year of the release date in descending order. So having done that, I can head back to the menu sheet and run that query again, and now I'll see the most recent year sitting at the top of the list. Now I'd like to add an extra grouping column to show the name of the month in which each film was released, so we'll see one row for each combination of release year and release month. We have several different ways to calculate the name of a month, as you'll know if you watched the video on date expressions from earlier in this playlist. But just as a very quick recap, I'm going to use the month and month name functions. So in my select list, I'm going to add a new line just below the year, and I'm going to begin with the month name function. Now the month name function accepts a number between 1 and 12 and converts that into the appropriate text description of the month. I want to calculate the number of the month then by nesting the month function inside the month name function. And I'm going to base this on the film's release date field. So I'm going to copy and paste that and make sure I've closed two sets of round brackets. I'll give it an alias. I'll call this one as release month, and then close the double quotes and concatenate a continuation character. Now, of course, as we've added a new column to the select list, which isn't in an aggregate function, I must include that in the group by clause. So let's copy and paste it, close the extra set of double quotes, and add another continuation character. So having done that, we can head back to the menu sheet once more and run the query again. And now we've got a separate row in each year showing the month name in which the film was released and the set of aggregations for that combination of year and month. Now, you've probably noticed that our month names have been sorted alphabetically rather than chronologically, and I'd much prefer to have January as the first month and December as the last. So in order to do that, we could attempt to order by the results of the month function rather than the month name and month functions. Let's try to do that and see what happens. If we head back to the Visual Basic Editor, I'm just going to copy the month of f.releaseDate expression from either the select list or from the group by clause, it doesn't really matter. And then at the end of my order by clause, I'm going to include an extra continuation character and then type in a comma at the start of the next line and paste in the month function. And I want to indicate that I'm sorting in ascending order this time. Now, you may be able to predict what's about to happen here. If I head back to the menu sheet and run that query, I get that same old error message about the query not including the expression month of release date as part of an aggregate function. But of course, I don't want to do that. I don't want to aggregate the month number. What I would like to do is group by the month number. So in order to include this function here, this expression here, in the order by clause, it must also be included in at least the group by clause. Fortunately, I don't have to display it in the select list. I think it would look a little strange to display a column showing the number of the months alongside the month names, but fortunately we don't have to do that. So the simplest thing to do here, I think, is just to copy the entire group by expression and then paste that in just below, and then just strip away the month name function. So as long as we have that expression in the group by clause, we can also order by the results of that expression in the order by clause. And if we head back to the menu sheet one more time and run that query, we've now got our films or our years sorted in descending order and our month names sorted chronologically from January through to December. So there we go, there's the basics of working with the group by clause in your SQL queries. In the next part of this playlist, we're going to continue the theme of grouping and aggregating by looking at how we can apply criteria to the results of aggregation functions. So I hope you're looking forward to that one. Thanks very much for watching as always. See you next time.